What if one of humanity's oldest spiritual tools isn't about finding water, but about finding information? For thousands of years, people have used simple sticks, rods, and pendulums to search for everything from underground springs to lost objects and personal guidance. Coincidence, intuition, or something we've forgotten how to use? Today, we're going to explore the fascinating world of dowsing. Welcome to Mystical Journeys with Jase. Imagine walking across an empty field with nothing more than two bent pieces of wire. Suddenly, the rods cross. You move back. They uncross. You take a step forward, and they cross again. Is it coincidence, muscle movement, or are you interacting with something that science doesn't fully understand? Today, we're exploring one of humanity's oldest and most mysterious practices. It's called dowsing. We're going to look at where it came from, how it's been used throughout history, and what modern practitioners use it for today. And perhaps the biggest question of all, is the power in the rods or pendulum, or is it in us? So let's start with segment number one. Let's talk a little bit about some of the tools that are used in dowsing first. This way, when you recognize that you've seen some of these, you'll be able to have a lot easier time to identify with them. Okay. All right. Some simple tools are things like L rods. They're like started off with like a piece of copper bent in the shape of an L. They're held between two hands. Some people will use a Y shaped branch from maybe like a peach tree. Very often you'll see people using pendulums. One of my favorites that I saw my own grandfather use was something called a bobber. And a bobber is basically a long pole that bounces with the weight on the end of it. The tool itself is generally viewed by practitioners as a focus or an amplifier rather than the source of information. Many experienced dowsers believe the instrument simply makes subtle unconscious movements easier to notice. So perhaps the first thing to understand is that the rods may not actually be doing any of the sensing at all. It's the entrainment that is a part of you. All right, let's talk a little bit about some of the history of dowsing. Dowsing's been going on for quite literally hundreds, maybe even thousands of years. In ancient cave art, there are researchers that have suggested that there are prehistoric cave paintings that depict figures holding forked branches. And although that this interpretation is often debated, it's something interesting to think about. In ancient China, historical accounts describe the use of rods in connection with selecting locations and working with landscapes. Even in ancient Egypt, there's speculation that some of the art that's on the different places in Egypt have showed people that are doing dowsing. They're dowsing for energy or dowsing for water. There's still a lot of information going on right now that they're trying to determine exactly what they're doing with these tools that they're using in their hands. Let's talk a little bit about the Middle Ages, though, because if you go back in history, there was definitely a pretty large period of time where anything that was unusual, people really had a problem with it. And those people they thought were evil or something like that. But one of the most interesting things about dowsing that I've learned over the years is the fact that the dowsers, they tended not to mess with the dowsers because the dowsers were the ones who helped to find the water. They were the ones who actually helped to find where mineral deposits were at so they could go digging in the earth. They would discover coal and ore like silver or gold or iron and things like that. Is what's interesting also is German miners became particularly well known for using the forked branches while they were searching for metals. So think about that during the Middle Ages. Is here you've got this very interesting tool that's going on. Nobody understood why it worked, but they knew that they needed it. So probably should leave those people alone and let them continue their practice. All right. Let's go to next segment here. Okay. Why water? Why has dowsing traditionally been associated with finding water? Historically, before modern surveying equipment, people relied on many methods to locate groundwater. In some communities, dowsers were regularly consulted before any wells were dug. Even in mine, my current well that's at my house right now, I knew that a dowser had already done the well, and he basically gave some very exact measurements on where they would find the well and how low in the ground that they would find the water. We'll get to that a little bit in the future here when we talk about one of my mentors. Anyhow, today, opinions differ about how effective dowsing is, and controlled scientific tests have generally not shown consistent performance beyond chance under blinded conditions. At the same time, practitioners and clients report very successful experiences in the real world setting. This creates an interesting tension between anecdotal experience and scientific testing. So, think about that for a second. This particular skill that people are working on, to be able to get a skill to be repeatable, it's something that you have to focus on and focus on practicing. It's like a lot of the things that we're trying to do here with this podcast. You get some information, you learn how to use it, and then you begin practicing it for a while. As you get better at it, it becomes more and more reliable. All right, let's get to the next segment. Modern uses of dowsing. Today, many practitioners use dowsing for far more than locating water. Examples include water wells, they're still practicing in rural communities, property energy. This was a really interesting one when I was watching my mentor dousing an area for a building. I thought it was very interesting that he was able to find all kinds of different things that, like, there were power lines and things going underneath the property. And when they checked on it, they were exactly on. Some people will douse their property to find very nice spots of good, healthy energy on their spots, like maybe something that could be considered an intersection of lines that are on your property where some good energy happened. Some people use dowsing to find lost objects. I've used it several times to find my keys. There's times I've had to find one of my pets, and I used the dowsing that I had learned, and it helped to aim me in a direction. Yeah, it's possible that, my pet could have been in any one of about four different directions, but the direction I chose ended up finding my pet. Long story to explain that one, but we'll talk about that some other day. Some practitioners will use dowsing for health and wellness. Some practitioners use pendulums or rods as part of a personal or complementary wellness practices. It's important to note that these methods are not scientifically validated for diagnosis or medical treatment. Some people use dowsing for questions like, should I take this job? Is this the best direction? Many practitioners view dowsing here as a way to help clarify intuition rather than predict the future. Another thing is spiritual development. Many people use pendulums as a tool for meditation, self reflection, or exploring symbolic questions. All right, let's talk about some of the different types of dowsing. Okay, physical dowsing, searching for water. Okay, one of the things with searching with the water is remember that the person who's using the dowsing, they first have to entrain with the element of water. That's one of the secrets behind all this is you have to be a pretty good receiver to make sure that you entrain for that element. And my mentor ended up having me take some time and really sit with water for a very long time. That way I could feel as close to the essence as I could. You can search for pipes, minerals, utility lines. You can go on a map and attempt to dowse for different locations that are on a map. Lots of practitioners claim that they can identify locations remotely, often used indoors. People use a lot of very simple yes and no questions while they're dowsing. Some people will use, like, a good example of it would be if the pendulum moves forward and backward, that's a yes answer. If it goes left to right, then that's a no answer. If it goes diagonally, that's maybe they need to clarify the question a little bit better. So when you're learning to do your dowsing, no matter wherever you get your training from, you're definitely going to want to build your code. So that's something else to kind of think about. All right. So how does it work? Okay. Let's take a look at a couple of perspectives. Okay. Theory one, it's the subtle environmental cues. Some researchers suggest that people may unconsciously detect environmental signals with tiny muscle movements reflected in the rods or the pendulum. This relates to the well known ideomotor effect. Okay. Next theory, heightened intuition. Many practitioners believe that dowsing helps access intuitive information that is normally below conscious awareness. The next theory, how about some energy fields? Some people propose that underground water or minerals or living systems generate fields that sensitive individuals can detect. This remains a matter of belief and has not been established by mainstream science. Theory 4, consciousness. Some traditions suggest that consciousness itself interacts with the information in ways not yet fully understood. All right, let's talk a little bit about the ideomotor effect. The ideomotor effect refers to small unconscious muscle movements that can occur in response to thoughts, expectations, or subtle perceptions. It also can be used to explain why pendulums move the way that they move. An interesting question remains, if unconscious movements are involved, what's influencing them? Expectations, subtle environmental observations, or something else? Different people answer that question differently. All right, next question. Can anyone learn? Many practitioners believe that anyone can improve with practice. I remember several times sitting with my mentor, Greg, and when I did it, and we would practice together, and he would send me charts to practice on and things like that. It took some time. I've got to admit, I was wrong most of the time. But let me say this, little by little is getting some time to practice with him. Little by little, we would send charts back and forth to each other, and I would say what I found on a piece of property, and he would draw exactly what was going on, or he would show me a picture of that actual property. Little by little, by getting that feedback, I started to get better and better at dowsing, and I've ended up using it a few times in my travels. So one of the things that goes with it is, first off, relaxing, quieting your mind, letting go of expectations, practice consistently, and make sure you're recording results. And if you've got somebody who's already pretty good at dowsing, definitely practice with them, because they're also going to be a little more accurate than you are, and it's going to give you a chance to get some feedback. So let me give you my perspective on all this here. Okay. When I first encountered this with my mentor, Greg, it was amazing because we were actually out in Colorado, and the area that he was practicing in, he was basically dowsing for an area where he could find, he wanted to do some gold panning. So sure enough, he would douse this map, and then we would find some very remote location. I'm going to tell you, some of the places that him and I went walking for, it was worth it, just the nature walk itself. We'd go down there, he already did some dowsing on it. And sure enough, he would end up, plumbing that river. And by the end of the day, there was a couple $100 worth of gold that was, in his pan or this. I can't even explain all the devices that he was using. But over the years of me getting to know him, something else I learned about him is he had done some amazing things. In fact, as I recall, one time he was showing me that there was a map of Bermuda. And on the map of Bermuda, he was contracted by the government to find two locations that were for good water. He ended up finding three. The third one he said was not potable, but the other two were. Well, about a year later, I ended up in Bermuda on a honeymoon. And when I was there, I took that moped and I went to all those locations, and sure enough, they were all there. So I thought that was really interesting because here I got a chance to meet and work with somebody who that was their entire job. That was him following his bliss. So what I wanted to say is that there's all kinds of different levels of dowsing. There are people that do this for a living. It's a wonderful tool if you get enough practice to use it. There's a lot of different things to do with it. Let me give you my own thoughts on this one. Is it the pendulum doing something? Well, I'll tell you, kind of a funny thing happened when I was sitting with Greg. We were watching one of the shows on television, and Deepak Chopra was showing somebody on the show. And here he's showing his dowsing, and he was saying about how the pendulum's doing this and the pendulum's doing that. And he kept saying it was the pendulum, the pendulum, the pendulum. Well, guess what? Greg looked at that and he just says, he says that guy's making a lot of money doing this. And he says, but in the end, it's about how you entrain it. And when you entrain with the item that you're doing, that's when the involuntary movement will create the pendulum to move. Now, some people will disagree with this, but I can also say that in my own practice with it, I can say that there's always a very subtle movement. And that's the thing. A lot of people use these subtle movements. Kinesiology is one of them. Acupressure is one of them. These little movements can happen based on, a response to what you're thinking about. Anyhow, that's just a little bit of my thinking about some dowsing. I think it's a very wonderful practice. I've used it myself. It's not the thing that I use the most, but what I can say is it's a pretty interesting thing to test out. A couple of things that I've used it for: balancing out, my well being, balancing my energy, finding some keys. Like I said, I lost my dog once and I had to go chase her through 3 miles of woods. And sure enough, I popped out about 100 yards from where she was at. So I'd have to say, at least my own testing with it worked out pretty good. So whether you see this as intuition, the unconscious mind, a spiritual practice, or simply an interesting historic tradition, dowsing invites us to ask a bigger question. How much of reality are we actually aware of? Maybe the rods didn't reveal the hidden water. Maybe they reveal how little we understood about ourselves. And perhaps that's the real journey. Anyhow, just want to say thank you for giving me your time to listen. I hope you got a little bit out of this podcast. I wanted to tell you that we're going to be getting into some interesting things coming up in the future. But today's podcast, we had some pretty heavy subjects over the last 24 podcasts. So I wanted to lighten things up just a little bit. Anyhow, everybody just keep focusing on being curious. Take a little time, do some practice with some dowsing, see if it might be a tool that you can use. And feel free to reach out and like the channel or subscribe. It definitely helps everything. So, all right. Thank you for your time again and have yourself a wonderful day.